Clerk.
Private Members' Business, Order of the Day number 1, National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill 2010, second reading.
Call the honourable member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this is the largest infrastructure investment in our nation's history. $43 billion, 3.25% of GDP. It beggars belief that a government could be so reckless as to allow such a massive investment to proceed without the publication of a business case, without the ongoing scrutiny of a parliamentary committee, and above all, without a rigorous cost-benefit analysis. Again and again, this government has stated the vital importance of major projects being the subject of a cost-benefit analysis. In the words of its leading economic advisor, the Treasury Secretary, Dr Henry, and I quote, "Any major infrastructure project must be subject to a rigorous cost-benefit analysis, and if it does not pass a rigorous cost-benefit analysis, then it necessarily detracts from Australia's well-being." This government even set up Infrastructure Australia for the express purpose of prioritising and analysing major infrastructure projects, and an essential element in Infrastructure Australia's process is a rigorous cost-benefit analysis of the projects being considered. But here, the largest infrastructure project will not be scrutinised by Infrastructure Australia or anybody else. Now, everybody agrees on the policy objective, on the core policy objective of universally available and affordable broadband. We believe that this should be achieved in a manner which delivers structural reform to the telecommunications sector and promotes greater competition, which is fair to Telstra shareholders, and above all, which imposes the lowest cost to taxpayers. A prudent government would have sought an objective analysis of the various ways and means of achieving those objectives, but not this one. Now, some people have argued that while the NBN is surely the most expensive way of delivering universal broadband, and I'd challenge honourable members to think of a more expensive way, it does at least achieve the objectives I've described. That, of course, is an argument that's only attractive to people to whom cost is no object, and who fail to recognise that every $1 billion spent unnecessarily on this infrastructure project is $1 billion that can't be spent wisely on an infrastructure project that is of greater need, of real need, be it a road or a school, a hospital, a railway line, a water project. But even this assumption that the NBN achieves those objectives is questionable. How do we deliver a more competitive telecom sector by establishing a gigantic government-owned fixed-line monopoly with which owners of other fixed-line networks will be prevented from competing? Let's not forget this. Under the NBN scheme, Telstra will not be permitted to compete for broadband or voice services over its HFC network, which passes 30% of Australian households. So that vital piece of competitive infrastructure, which could be deployed to keep prices low from the NBN, will be eliminated purely to support the economics of this government-owned monopoly. Already the NBN is under fire from other telco companies, and most significantly the West Australian, South Australian and Tasmanian governments for its plan of limiting the points of interconnect to its network to as few as 14, all in capital cities, overbuilding billions of dollars of fibre backhaul infrastructure and essentially rendering it worthless, and as a consequence actually reducing the amount of competition in those regional areas which were supposed to be the primary beneficiary. Now, you don't have to take the opposition's word for this. This is the Tasmanian Labor government, the South Australian Labor government and, of course, the coalition government in Western Australia making precisely these points, as do a range of other telco companies. And why do we imagine a new monopoly network costing $43 billion will not seek to recover a return on its investment by using its monopoly power to increase internet access costs? We know they've been coming down year on year for well over a decade. But the McKinsey implementation study states that internet access costs under the NBN will increase in real terms year after year. So what we are spending is $43 billion of taxpayers' money to provide universal broadband, which will be more expensive than it is today. Now, this issue of affordability is a critical one, and one would have thought that the members on the government side of the chamber would be more alert to this. Only 43% of households with incomes less than $40,000 use the internet at home, according to the latest ABS numbers. There is the digital divide. It's based on income, it's based on affordability, it's based on poverty. And yet what the government is proposing to do is to create a government-owned monopoly which will be massively capitalised and which will actually increase the cost of internet services, thereby worsening the digital divide, reducing the affordability of internet access to Australian households. And I might say that households with incomes of $120,000 a year or more have about 95% internet access at home. So there is a massive gulf in terms of income, and that is the single biggest fault line in the digital divide in terms of internet access. And this government's plan is going to make that worse. Now, only yesterday, no less than the OECD expressed its real concern about the way in which the NBN will close out facilities-based competition in fixed-line broadband services. And their report states multiple empirical studies have stressed the value of competition. Moreover, such a monopolistic incumbent, such as the NBN, could forestall the development of as yet unknown superior technological alternatives. The OECD expressly recommends that competition between technologies be maintained, not suppressed, as is the plan with the NBN. The OECD also criticises the government for its failure to conduct a cost-benefit analysis and expressly recommends that the planning and coordination of public infrastructure be improved by independent, rigorous, published cost-benefit analyses. Now, what is the argument against the cost-benefit analysis that we are seeking through this bill to have conducted by the Productivity Commission? What is the objection that Senator Conroy provides? Well, first he says that cost-benefit analyses are subjective. Well, if that is a fatal flaw, why does the government advocate their use for all other infrastructure projects? Or put another way, if the government believes a cost-benefit analysis is needed for $100 million worth of road infrastructure, why is it not needed for a $43 billion NBN? He says it will be expensive. Well, the most expensive study done by the Productivity Commission last year cost $2 million. It has a $36 million budget. It can well accommodate this study within that budget, and yet this minister, Senator Conroy, spent $25 million of taxpayers' money not doing a cost-benefit analysis with McKinsey. Extraordinary, extraordinary, so extraordinary that McKinsey actually flagged in the opening paragraphs of their report that it was not a cost-benefit analysis. And of course, this is a $43 billion project. He says it will hold things up. Absolutely untrue. The Productivity Commission's work would continue while the building of the network in its experimental sites, its demonstration sites, goes on. He points to the importance of ending the vertical integration of Telstra's customer access network with its retail business. Well, that is one of the outcomes of the NBN, but surely this is the most expensive way of achieving it. If vertical integration is the problem, then separation, be it functional or structural, is the answer, and it is plain that you do not need to trash the existing customer access network and build a completely new one to deliver that. But finally, he points to other studies which have extolled the virtues of universal broadband. Well, we all agree with that, but that's like pointing to the general virtues of better public transport as a means to justify any particular investment that's got anything to do with public transport. But the case he is putting privately to independent members, Mr. Speaker, is of course a very different one. What he is saying there is that the Productivity Commission will not give the NBN a tick. He says that he knows the NBN does not stack up economically and that it will fail the Productivity Commission's test. There is a vital interest in us having real accountability on this project, and that is why the objects of this bill, a business case, a Productivity Commission cost-benefit analysis and ongoing parliamentary scrutiny are absolutely critical if this House is to fulfil its duty of safeguarding the interests of the taxpayers of Australia. And, Mr Speaker, I move that this bill be now read a second time.
Is the motion seconded? The member for Cowper?
I second the motion. Reserve my right to speak.
The motion seconded. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Greenway.
Mr Deputy Speaker, let's be clear about one thing. This bill is not about accountability. The opposition cannot come into this place and say they support universal broadband, that they support equality of opportunity, when all that is being done here is simply a deliberate attempt to make sure that the NBN is not delivered to people in Riverstone in my electorate, is not delivered to people who have never had any proper access to internet in their own homes. You cannot come into this place and say that you support these objectives, but you don't support the NBN. Why is that? Because let's look at all the other countries in the world and in our region who are doing this. Let's look at how ICT is transforming people's lives and their economies. I'll talk in a few minutes, Mr Deputy Speaker, about examples such as Korea. This is the model. This is the 21st century solution, not some 20th century solution for a problem that hasn't been fixed under 18 goes when the opposition was then in government. I'd also point out, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the member for Wentworth mentioned the OECD report. Well, the day that I take advice from an OECD who tells us that we should increase the GST will be a long day indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I also note that during the commentary on this debate, we've had a lot of agreement with people like Carlos Slim, saying that we had the richest telco bloke in the world come out and tell us he could build it for a lot less. I'm not about to take advice from Carlos Slim, who ran Telmex, which is the only case that went to the WTO for anti-competitive conduct. I'm not about to take advice either from the OECD advising that we should increase the GST, nor from people who have form in delivering anti-competitive conduct. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for Wentworth interjects and he talks about the affordability gulf. Well, I'll tell you what that affordability gulf is, and for the regional members here, let's talk about your gulf. Let's talk about the affordability gulf. The electoral divisions ranked by proportion of households with a broadband internet connection. I know I've brought up this before, but for the member for Cowper's benefit, you're still the 20th worst. He's still the 20th worst, Mr Deputy Speaker, since we were last here. So you talk about the affordability gulf, and why is that? Why is that? It is because the regulatory system in Australia is busted. It's busted. And it's not going to get better unless we develop a wholesale-only access network, surprise, which is what the NBN will be, delivering competitive retail prices on a real level playing field that has only been talked about but never done before. This is what will destroy the affordability gulf. This is what will make sure that the member for Lyne doesn't have the 18th worst electoral division ranking for broadband internet connection. It'll make sure the member for New England doesn't have the 13th worst. And the member for Wentworth being the number 144 out of 150, that's one thing I can definitely concede that he would certainly be an expert on this, Mr Deputy Speaker, because he's the 6th best. And we have the member for Bradfield who will contribute here, as I've said previously, is the best of all. But Mr Deputy Speaker, we come here today talking about what belief we have here. What belief do we have? The member for Wentworth says we all believe in the same thing. Well, I don't think we do. I don't think we do, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I believe in something that those opposite don't. I believe in the transformational power of ICT to drive total factor productivity, to increase education opportunities and jobs, and to actually benefit the lives of individuals. That's the reality of the information age. That's the reality of it. ICT around the world is driving growth. ICT capital has 7 times the impact on productivity than non-ICT capital in nations with lower levels of ICT usage and around 3 times more in other nations. ICT leads to jobs growth. Firms in low and middle income countries that use more ICT have faster sales and jobs growth, as well as higher productivity growth. And most telling of all, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that of all telecom infrastructures, broadband has the highest impact on economic growth. So where does that leave us? Well, where is Australia standing today? Where is Australia standing today? We're in the bottom half of the OECD countries in terms of broadband take-up. We're paying more for broadband than most OECD countries. We are 35th for quality of competition in internet service provision. We have to do better, Mr Deputy Speaker. We have to do better. So what's the option? The option is do nothing, according to the opposition. It's a do-nothing option. We haven't seen any other constructive analysis or constructive plans from the opposition about what they would do to remedy this. And I will address at this point, the member for Wentworth talks about the amount of investment. Well, let's look at the amount of investment in a few comparative telco infrastructure developments in Australia. In 1870, the Overland Telegraph, the estimated cost to the public purse in today's dollars is $0.9 billion. So what does that equate to? It actually equates to $5,365 per person. In 1950, the CAN was built, the Customer Access Network was built. The estimated cost today, $10 billion. The estimated cost per head of population in today's figures, $1,222. In 2010, the NBN, estimated cost to the public purse in today's dollars, $27 billion. That's the contribution, that's the public contribution. With an Australian population of 22.4 million, guess what it comes out as? The estimated cost per head of population is actually the lowest, $1,204 per person. So how anyone can come in here and say that this is the biggest expenditure and yet we're not going to get a return on it, Mr Deputy Speaker, it simply defies belief. What has been so disappointing in this debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, what has been so disappointing is the campaign of uninformed armchair commentary that we've had about this. No answers and limited analysis. And I will point out that, as I said here only a few weeks ago, I went to the Liberal Party website today just to see whether they actually had a new plan, just to see whether they were going to come out with something new this week in their debate. But no, we still have the same policy, The coalition will cancel the NBN, regardless of what happens in any cost-benefit analysis, regardless of what happens with any studies. These people will oppose it. It simply will not happen under these people. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I said, this is not about transparency. The opposition has no right coming in here taking the high moral ground, and I think it's the ultimate insult to the Australian people that we have, and to future Australians who are going to read these proceedings and write theses on this issue, that this debate about the most significant infrastructure project in Australia's history has been so lacking, so fixated on 12 megabits per second. The commentary so fixated on people being asked whether they want faster emails or faster YouTube downloads. During the break, there was a significant announcement on e-health, a significant announcement about technologies and how this government is going to be utilising the NBN to drive the treatment of diseases in people's homes, are going to be actually be able to deliver health services in a way that simply cannot be delivered any other way. Does this appear on anyone's radar here? No, it does not. No, it does not. Mr Deputy Speaker, I also ask those people opposite, how much have they been speaking and listening to young people in their electorates? Well, I have during the break, and I'll give one example. I went to St Joseph's School in Schofields during the break. I went and talked to years 5 and 6. They were asking me about the NBN more than any other series of questions. They asked when they were going to get it at home because they know Riverstone is the site of the first rollout. They were full of questions about download speeds and how much better it is going to be when they get the NBN. I even had someone ask a question on net neutrality, which is one of the most complex regulatory issues that every regulator in the world is dealing with. And I was being asked about net neutrality by these young people. Now, if the member for Bradfield doesn't listen to young people, that's fine. But I've been listening. I've been listening to these people, and I can go back to my electorate and look these people in the eye and say that, yes, I do want to get this delivered for you. Yes, I do believe that you have a right to have the highest quality broadband services. I will also point out, Mr Deputy Speaker, the importance of broadband for inclusion and the importance of broadband through a ubiquitous network such as the NBN for people with a disability. I note that the broadband stakeholder group in the UK, and Kip Meek, anyone who's met Kip Meek will know his intelligence in this area. Oh, and I'll quote from here, next generation broadband would improve the potential for video communication to compensate for reduced mobility and enhance communication for those who are deaf or hard of hearing by facial cues and sign language, which require high definition and high frame rates. These things which can only be delivered through a ubiquitous fibre broadband network. And for those opposite who think that wireless is the solution, well, Physics 101, nothing is faster than the speed of light. Nothing is faster than the speed of light. And the only thing that's going to carry that is a fibre network. Wireless networks, by contrast, shared resources, shared spectrum. You will never be able to deliver the benefits through the NBN that you will actually, through wireless, that you will be able to get through the NBN. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, for those who come here and say that this is about transparency and about holding the government to account, it's not about that at all. If you support jobs, if you support productivity, if you support a 21st century solution for problems that will not go away, then you will reject this bill and let the NBN proceed.
Order. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill 2010. Because it's necessary for the Coalition to introduce this private member's bill because the government is refusing to subject the National Broadband Network project to independent scrutiny and parliamentary oversight. And you'd have to say to the members opposite, what do they have to fear so much from scrutiny? I mean, if this project was going to stand up, they should be welcoming scrutiny. They should be welcoming oversight. But in fact, we get exactly the opposite. We get members opposite carping about the technological benefits without reference to the actual cost and the return that would be made. And it was interesting to see the member for Greenway talking about the required contribution by the government and the presumed private contribution that was going to be made by the private sector. And that certainly anticipates that there will be substantial revenues generated sufficient to warrant private sector investment. Well, let me tell you, the private sector is not going to invest unless the project stacks up. And I'd certainly want to know, if I was a major private sector investor, I'd want to have the comfort of a Productivity Commission inquiry, of a proper analysis of the revenues and the risks that this project would deliver or would subject my investment to, but this government rejects that notion. This legislation is not an attempt to delay the NBN. Faster and more reliable broadband has the support of both sides of Parliament. It is clear in my electorate and others across regional Australia that better broadband services are needed to improve investment and to lower the digital divide between cities and regions. This bill is an attempt by the Coalition to ensure the scheme is financially accountable and targeted to those areas desperately in need of improved broadband. In its first term, the Rudd-Gillard government wasted record amounts of taxpayers' money. The home insulation debacle, the BER scheme, they've got a gold medal in waste, and we want to ensure that they don't go for a further gold medal in relation to the NBN program. These programs followed a common theme. They were rushed through without scrutiny and without ongoing oversight of spending. The recent Australian National Audit Office report into the home insulation scheme issued a warning about how this government spends money and certainly cast very great dispersions on the government's ability to manage programs. Vitally important that the program be appropriately managed, and the Rudd-Gillard government has formed in mismanagement, has formed in waste. Despite the project's budget and despite the importance of broadband services, the government is refusing to release a business plan, it's refusing to do a cost-benefit analysis, it's refusing to allow parliamentary scrutiny. In fact, the government has expressly sought to avoid any inquiries into the NBN through the Public Works Committee. Through regulations registered in July, no aspect of the NBN can come to the Public Works Committee. The explanatory memorandum to those regulations suggests that an inquiry would place NBN Co at a competitive disadvantage because its plans would be publicly scrutinised. This excuse is nothing more than a smokescreen. The NBN Co is constructing a wholesale monopoly and is systematically removing any competitive threats. There is no competition reasons preventing the government from conducting the NBN rollout transparently and in full scrutiny. In contrast, competition in the industry would benefit from more details of the NBN to ensure regulatory certainty on the telecommunications playing field. The only possible reason for avoiding scrutiny must be that Labor quite clearly has something to hide. Perhaps this is why the government is removing potential competition to the NBN, because it knows the business plan is unviable in a competitive environment. The OECD reported yesterday in their economic surveys of Australia that, and I quote, such a monolistic incumbent, that's the NBN, could forestall the development of as yet unknown superior technological alternatives. The report goes on to say that given the cost and impact on competition, additional efforts for rigour and transparency would be welcome. Well, that's the OECD, Mr Deputy Speaker, very concerned about the restrictions that this government is placing on competition in the market, because we know that it is competition that will be a major driver of lower prices and improved services, not the creation of a protected government monopoly, a government monopoly delivered at great cost to the taxpayer with benefits yet to be determined.
Order. Member for Campus, time is expired. Question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I speak against the Coalition's proposal here today. Deputy Speaker, this here is a map. This is a map. This shows how this is a member for Wentworth's electorate, and here's a map about was showing that so many of the people who live in his electorate live within 2 kilometres of an exchange. This is a map of Central Ipswich. Central Ipswich, member for Wentworth. That's the people that can't get access to the kind of broadband we need, and I represent the rural and regional parts of Ipswich as well as the area of Somerset. That's why we need the national broadband. Before the last election, 2007 election rather, I got Geoscience Australia to provide me with a map which showed the consequences of the failure of the Coalition with respect to the broadband plans they took into the 2007 election. Great swathes of my electorate not covered by their proposals. Yet here, with Labor's proposal, the National Broadband Network, rolling out in Springfield Lakes in my electorate, and of course the member for Oxley electorate as well, we'll see the National Broadband Network rolled out into that area next year. But the country towns in my electorate that wouldn't get coverage under your proposals, places like Caminia, Fernvale, Toogoolawah, Kilcoy, Lowood, they wouldn't get coverage under your proposals. They had 19 failed plans, Deputy Speaker, not interested in the National Broadband Network, always opposed to it. This bill and the motion he had last week, or the last couple of weeks, is all about his own relevance. That's about that. He's there to do a job on the National Broadband Network. Always opposed to it. That's what it's about. Yet in those country towns and in Ipswich, in my electorate, small businesses, farmers, school kids, and those people that need it will deserve it and get it. The Coalition has always been opposed to it. And we had the member for Cowper saying about the fact that, oh, we're not trying to delay it. It's just nonsense. They're opposed to it. It's in their DNA. It's almost like their opposition to our fair work reforms and their opposition to trade unions. It's like work choices. It's in their DNA. Their opposition to the National Broadband. I just can't understand it, Deputy Speaker, why they are so opposed to it. We're talking about 25,000 jobs. We're talking about my electorate and electorates across the country being covered by the kind of fibre to the premises that we need. We know what you lag behind. You pay too much, those people who've got broadband, too much for it. Not enough people have coverage. It's too slow. Go to Korea, go to places like that. You'll see so quick is the download, so quick is the coverage, so broad is it. Yet in our country, one of the richest countries in the world, we've got the Coalition in this place rolling out what they knew very well was a failed policy of $6.3 billion. They know this is all about politics. This is not about economic development, productivity. This is not about actually helping regional and rural Australia. This is about making the member for Wentworth relevant. This is about their posing and preening and posturing to help small business. This is not about their facade of economic responsibility when in fact they're being economically irresponsible. They parade themselves as the bastions of small business and the supporters of small business when they know very well that small businesses will so benefit by the National Broadband Network. And what about e-health? Their policy was to scrap e-health. E-health so integrated with the National Broadband Network, so vital for regional and rural South East Queensland and across the country. Yet the Coalition comes in here and opposes it. Deputy Speaker, Paul Haymans. Paul Haymans is one of the business people in the Somerset region. He's made it very clear, and so have all the councils. Paul Haymans made it clear in an article he wrote in the Somerset newspaper Why the Somerset region? My electorate needs a national broadband network because the catchment is simply so important in that area. Because simply the local economy and small businesses need to be able to compete nationally. Or whether you're living in Toogoolawah or Toorak, you actually need the national broadband network because it's so vital to make you to be able to compete. We've got all the councils. We've got the Lockyer Valley Regional Council and the electorate are right. We've got the Scenic Rim Council in the electorate are right. We've got the Ipswich City Council. We've got the Somerset Regional Council, all in South East Queensland, urging the national broadband network into their area, demanding we bring it in, and yet the coalition simply opposes it. This is not about looking for better costing and value for the money. This is about opposition for opposition's sake.
Time has expired. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I'll call the honourable member for Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to commend my colleague, the member for Wentworth, for his determination in bringing this bill before the House. The NBN, even from its inception, which I suspect was first scribbled on the back of a serviette as a big ticket item for Labor's 2007 election campaign, has a paucity of detail. For 3 years, this government and its minister have nailed the lid shut on a project that is said will cost the Australian taxpayer in the vicinity of $43 billion and will take a decade to implement. So far, all we have is no more than a mud map. This bill seeks to unlock the book on what started off as a proposition in 2007 that would only cost $4.7 billion. Is NBN destined to go down the same path as the Pink Bats fiasco, the gross overspending on school halls, libraries, cleverly yet misleading describing the building education revolution, or BER? Peter Rule, writing in the Financial Review on Remembrance Day, said this of the BER. The BER has been one of those dogs that just won't hunt but still needs to be fed. Will the NBN add to the pack? The cost of the NBN is equivalent to half the debt they generated when previously in government. That is one concern. Of greater concern is allowing this government to exploit their role to create a monopoly which they will be in control of. While this government, straight-faced, rails against the oligopoly of the big four banks and the need for greater competition, they are working hard to create their very own monopoly. A monopoly that will control one of the most vital arteries in this nation's communication network. Yet Labor, in their campaign manifesto published in March 2007, which they took to the people and got elected on the strength of their promises, said this, and I quote directly from the policy document: "A Rudd Labor government will partner with the private sector to deliver the national broadband over 5 years, undertake a competitive assessment of proposals from the private sector to build the network, ensure competition in the sector through an open access network that provides equivalence of access charges and scope for access seekers to differentiate their product offerings, put in place regulatory reforms to ensure certainty for investment, and make public equity investment of up to $4.7 billion. This document goes on to say that this commitment will be financed from existing government investment in communications, including the $2 billion Communications Fund and through the Future Fund's 17% share in Telstra, which will earn dividends and be sold down to the normal market level after November 2008. What started off as a U-Butte idea, the best thing since sliced bread, is now being marketed as something that may turn out to be considerably less than what was first described. The first revelation that greeted us was that not everyone is going to get it. Any community with less than 1,000 will be disqualified. That is a real concern to me, because when I heard that little snippet, when it was revealed, I found that Gilmore had about 22 little towns and villages that would be left behind. The latest revelation is that rather than being free, the NBN is going to cost each household that gets somewhere between several hundred and several $1,000s per household. They have also refused to refer the NBN to their own newly created specialist infrastructure agency, Infrastructure Australia. The biggest infrastructure investment in our nation's history is not being scrutinised by this body. Why is that? The Governor-General signed a decree that exempted the NBN from being overseen by the Public Works Committee. Why is that? Residents, organisations and businesses alike want a fast, reliable and competitive broadband service. While I'm happy for the 74% of homes in Kiama Downs and Minamurra in the electorate of Gilmore, who are among the first to be signed up to the national broadband network, there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered, like how much is it going to cost each household as a start point? In comparison, Americans' broadband upgrade will cost the government $7 billion. So why does our scheme have to cost so much more? Tasmania, where the government's NBN scheme was trialled, has resulted in a low take-up rate. NBN's response to the Tasmanian experience was that NBN advocated compulsory connection, whether the consumer wanted it or not, and forced people to pay for a product they don't want or don't need. And in yesterday's Sun Herald, it quotes that 3 towns in Tasmania only had 11% take-up rate. Now, NBN CEO Mike Quigley claimed in the Senate estimates that the rollout of the NBN in Tasmania was on time and on budget. Yet when quizzed what the cost had been, Quigley would not reveal any facts. The transition of this bill will allow the whole NBN proposal to be analysed and dissected factually, objectively, openly and honestly. And let it be said on the record that I welcome the Coalition's push to have a joint standing committee oversee the rollout of the NBN and would certainly put my hand up to be part of it. I remind the House again that this government does not have a good track record when it comes to developing good policy or rolling it out. The Coalition will not delay the construction of the NBN, but it simply seeks to ensure this enormous endeavour is carried out with the rigorous analysis it deserves, and I commend the bill to the House.
Well, the question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I don't rise to support the bill before the House. I notice that my colleague, the member for Gilmore, says that if we could have something factual and logical in the debate, then that would progress the whole debate. I'd welcome that for once from the other side. The argument of this bill is it's all about a cost-benefit analysis. It's done within the context of us knowing full well that the member for Wentworth's writing instructions on taking on his shadow portfolio were go out and destroy the NBN. And that's the context within which this bill sits. The reality for those of us, as my colleague indicated before, in seats where we constantly have people contacting our office frustrated and annoyed that they can't get access to broadband, is that there have been 18 attempts by those opposite when in government to get this right, and they failed. I profoundly believe that a ubiquitous rollout of fibre across the nation is the most effective way to go, and competition between service providers to provide access to that is the most effective way to go. And one of the reasons I believe this is I actually did do a trip to Silicon Valley with a parliamentary committee last year, and we met with people like Cisco and Google, and the message that we were getting at that point in time from them was this was definitely the way to go. This was the way to go. And why was that? Because the experience in America with competition on the infrastructure side of the rollout of broadband was that it had become a dog's breakfast. The companies will go in and provide infrastructure in particular areas, and then they would make it non-compatible with infrastructure in other areas. So what was supposed to be competition on the retail side in providing services was actually being limited because whoever put your infrastructure in had designed it in such a way that you had to use their retail services. I think that in time, people will look back at this debate, and I think people like the member for Wentworth actually know this. They will look back at this debate and say, what on earth were they thinking? How short-sighted were they being? My colleague, the member for Greenway, outlined, for example, the rollout of telegraphic services and telephony services in this country. We would never have done that based on the sorts of arguments that those are opposite are putting forward. We'd all be sitting here now without a telephone, without the capacity to telegraph each other because of this short-sighted view of the rollout of transformative infrastructure that they are proposing if that had been in place at that point in time. Sometimes we have to look to the future in a significant way, and we have to do it in a way that says there is a role for government in laying down the foundations for transformative infrastructure. That is what the National Broadband Network is about. Only a couple of weeks ago now, in speaking in this parliament, I raised the issue of a local company in my area. This company is actually an international stock exchange company operating from a home-based business with offices in both the Northern American area and the European area. And the gentleman who runs this had spoken to the local paper about his frustration with existing broadband services, and he gave a simple example: telephone hookup for all his offices around the world, all lined up, everybody put in place in time. You can imagine what a challenge that is. He has to upload a document to them so that they can all work off. The thing keeps cutting out, shutting down. In the end, they abandon the attempt to have a telephone hookup. That is why, for businesses in Australia, that want to connect to world trade, the rollout of a fibre network is so critically important. It has the capacity to transform our economies, and no more so than in the regions. In an area like mine, one of our biggest challenges is transport infrastructure, partly because we're one of the biggest commuter bases in New South Wales. And my colleague from the Central Coast would have a similar story to tell. Approximately 20,000 people a day commuting from the Illawarra to Sydney and to Western Sydney for work. A lot of those are back office jobs, they're finance jobs, they're HR jobs. If those people could get secure, fast network access from home, the reality could well be a transformation in the way they work. They could actually work from home 2 or 3 days a week. This proposal has the capacity to transform the way we live. I think the member for Wentworth knows that, and I think this is his cheap option to attack under instruction.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Bradfield.
Madam Deputy Speaker, today's debate is not, as those opposite would like to have us believe, about whether an improved broadband infrastructure for Australia is a good thing. Of course, an improved broadband infrastructure for Australia is a good thing. Today's debate is very precisely about this question. Is it a good idea, in advance of committing $43 billion of taxpayers' money, to do two things? Require a business case which meets normal commercial standards, and require a cost-benefit study to be conducted by the well-respected organisation, the Productivity Commission. That is the question before the House, and I want to make 3 points in the brief time available to me. Firstly, to conduct a cost-benefit study is a manifestly sensible thing which should be done with this regulatory initiative, as it should be done with every substantial regulatory initiative. Secondly, it is not true that this bill will involve any slowdown in the building of the national broadband network. And thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to make the point that in a circumstance as we have here, where the executive government has manifestly failed to live up to reasonable standards of transparent decision-making, it has manifestly failed to live up to its own standards as to how the case for an enormous project of this kind ought to be made. This is surely precisely the kind of instance where the Parliament should step in to insist on a higher standard of scrutiny. If the new paradigm means anything, Madam Deputy Speaker, it means that these are circumstances in which the Parliament should step in to require that a cost-benefit study be conducted. My first point, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is widely accepted that a cost-benefit study is a good discipline before any major regulatory initiative. I quote the Commonwealth Government's Best Practice Regulation Handbook, which says, "The Australian Government is committed to the use of cost-benefit analysis to assess regulatory proposals to encourage better decision-making." The second point I want to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that this is not about delay. Let's be clear. To date, 4,000 premises have been passed by the network in Tasmania. A further 10,000 will be passed by mid-July next year. These are tiny, tiny fractions of the complete network build of 10 million premises which is proposed, and on the mainland much less has been done than in Tasmania. So there is no prospect of this bill materially slowing down the build of the network, even if it were the case, as it is not, that this bill in any way requires that the build be suspended while the cost-benefit analysis goes on. It does not. Simply, this bill is designed to ask, is the way that we are proceeding the most sensible way to build a broadband network? For example, clause 5.2b, it requires the consideration of the different options by which broadband services of particular speeds could be made available to all Australians, and an estimate of the likely time frame and cost of each option. In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, the outcome of this work will not be a simple yes or no. If it finds, for example, that the present model cannot be justified in terms of the benefits which are delivered for the costs, there may very well be other models which emerge. So it is not at all the case that this is about stopping broadband. It is simply about saying, before we embark on this huge project, let's do some standard analysis to see whether the design of it is sensible. And my third point, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is precisely the kind of circumstance where a new paradigm parliament should step in to insist on a higher standard of scrutiny. If I can quote what the member for Lyons said on the 7th of September in talking about outcomes from negotiations he and other independents had held with the Labor Party. He said, "This is a good and big outcome from this process, and one that hopefully demonstrates that this is not going to be a weak parliament, this is going to be a strong parliament." And those are important sentiments. This should be a strong parliament. Ordinarily, when an executive government had manifestly failed to live up to its own standards, to its own stated principles as to how a project of this scale ought to be carried out, ordinarily there would be nothing this parliament could do. But these are not ordinary times, Madam Deputy Speaker. We do have a parliament which has the capacity to impose the proper discipline on this executive government to require that there be a cost-benefit study before this massive expenditure is committed to, and I commend the bill to this House for that reason.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Dobell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to oppose the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, let's be fair dinkum in terms of this debate. The coalition went to the last election saying they opposed an NBN. They opposed an NBN. So all their actions since then, during that period of time, have been about trying to frame an argument around how they can demolish and knock off an NBN. And they're very much on their own. They're very much isolated in relation to this approach that they've taken. We've just heard from the member for Bradfield that if we went through this productivity review and commission, then we may actually come up with another model. That would make number 19. 19 different models we'd get if we get another one that comes up from the coalition. They had 12 years in government. They came up, what was their solution? Let's come up with another plan. Another plan, basically another plan every half year. Let's try and get as many plans as we can put in place, and that justifies us for doing nothing in relation to making sure that we have proper broadband, fast broadband in Australia. The electorate that I represent, the electorate of Dobell, is on the New South Wales Central Coast, and it's an electorate that has over 35,000 people who commute to Sydney every day. We have higher unemployment on the Central Coast than other areas of Australia. And the reason they commute to Sydney is because that's where the jobs are. And one of the reasons the jobs aren't on the Central Coast is because we don't have access to fast-speed broadband. One recent commentator on the Central Coast who's very much a friend of the Liberal Party, who's now actually leading a campaign to try and see the rollout of the NBN on the Central Coast in a faster as fast as it possibly can, Mr. Edgar Adams, and he writes for the Central Coast Business Review, not a Labor-friendly magazine at all by any stretch of the imagination. Well, his analysis of the difference between the parties was quite simple. He said, "There is no question that here on the coast and across the nation, the lack of policies and the ignorance of the difference between fibre optic and wireless communications costs the Liberals government." He's now leading a campaign to make sure that the Central Coast, like other areas of Australia, gets access through the NBN to fast broadband. The alternative that we're given is an alternative to try and stop, delay and make sure that the NBN doesn't come out. Not only is it their actual policy that they're opposed to the NBN, but they've done everything they possibly can to stand in the way of Australians getting fast access to broadband. Now, it may be all right if you live in the city. It may be all right that you may have the sufficient broadband there to conduct business. But can I say, certainly on the Central Coast, and I know that the member for Robertson, who's also my colleague from the Central Coast, will be speaking later in this debate, we know that on the Central Coast we don't have access to fast broadband. That's affecting economic development on the Central Coast. We are seeing businesses avoid coming to the Central Coast because they can't get broadband there. The business park at Tuggerah, a business park set up for business, has slow broadband. And the answer to that is making sure that we get the NBN in place and operational. Now, the coalition, in terms of calling for a cost-benefit analysis, don't come to this argument with clean hands. Where were they when they were in government in relation to cost-benefit analysis? Where were they in relation to the Adelaide-Darwin Railway, the privatisation of Telstra, even the Opal regional broadband plan? Where was the cost-benefit analysis there? The reason they didn't do it then, and the reason they're calling for it now, is their motive is not about cost-benefit analysis. Their motive is only about delaying and stopping the rollout of the NBN. It was their policy at the last election. They said, we are opposed to the NBN. They remain opposed to the NBN. The bill that's before Parliament at the moment is a stunt. It's an exercise in trying to make sure that they can demolish the NBN and deny people from my region fast access to broadband, economic growth that will flow from broadband, jobs that will flow from broadband. It's trying to strangle the Australian economy, and the member for Wentworth should be ashamed that he is using this bill to try and promote his own self-interests when he knows better than most that the national broadband network is in Australia's best interests. This is a bill that must be opposed.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I speak in support of this bill. It is about time that the facts and fiction of broadband and NBN Co were set out for the Australian people, because the NBN Co proposal is a charade born out of politics and spin, born out of a populist government determined to promise whatever it takes to hold on to power. A grand promise produced to generate votes regardless of the real cost to the Australian people. So fact, Australia will benefit from the provision of high-speed broadband across the nation. Nobody disputes this. We support it on our side of the House. That is the policy objective. Fiction, high-speed broadband can only be produced by an outdated monopoly telco model such as NBN Co. Fact, high-speed broadband can be introduced to Australia's major cities by private enterprise at little or no cost to the taxpayers of Australia. Just look at the current I3 project in Brisbane. High-speed broadband, up and down, and importantly, open access. And the Brisbane City Council rollout is at no cost to the ratepayers. But still, what was Minister Connery's first comment? That he wanted to see a cost-benefit analysis. Fiction. High-speed broadband can only be delivered to rural Australia as part of this national monopoly NBN Co. Fact. The NBN Co model will involve an increased charge on all city users to fund less profitable centres, cross-subsidisation. Fact. Responsible government should be prepared to subsidise the delivery of high-speed broadband to rural and regional Australia. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have no fear of supporting those great Australians in rural and regional Australia. They deserve it. It is simply a matter of being honest with Australians, not hiding the subsidy in the spin of promoting NBN Co. Fiction. Only by exempting NBN Co from the competition requirements of the Trade Practices Act can it succeed. Fact. Successive governments, Liberal and Labor, have acknowledged and supported the importance of encouraging competition. This is plain common sense, almost universally accepted, yet this government wants to take Australia back to the dead hand of government monopoly. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is this Gillard government who are the real Luddites in this debate, building an enormously expensive, outdated telco monopoly model that will lack the flexibility and management capacity to adapt to changing times and changing technologies. They do not care. Their eyes are willfully closed to sensible market-driven alternatives. Why? Because their politics get in the way. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a government in crisis mode. As their promises are broken one by one, sheer obstinate pride prevents them from acknowledging that there are genuine alternatives that will work better and reduce the cost to Australia. This government says to the people of Australia, trust us, but their track record of financial disasters, from insulation to BER, tells the Australian people that there are very good reasons to be very worried. Not just alert, Madam Deputy Speaker, but alarmed. When this government says trust us and there is taxpayers' money involved, the Australian people know that there is something very, very wrong. The Australian people trusted the Labor government and they have been let down. Not just let down, but betrayed in every instance. Betrayed with waste on a gargantuan scale. And now the Australian people simply ask and deserve some financial transparency. How better to do this than the Labor government be required to publish a business case for the NBN, refer the NBN Co to the Productivity Commission to produce a cost-benefit analysis, and see the establishment of a joint select committee to ensure there is at least some parliamentary scrutiny. Given the Gillard government's track record, this is not unreasonable. But this arrogant, dangerously spendthrift government says no. Grand plans with other people's money. That sums up this Labor government. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Coalition brings forward this simple bill. It does so to answer the very real concerns in the Australian community. It does so to address the very real concerns of the ICT community. It seeks sensible assessment of an extraordinary expenditure of $43 billion. If the Gillard Labor government is afraid of this proposal put forward by the member for Wentworth, one can only wonder how bad the project must be. This bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, provides for an independent review of one of the largest expenditures in our history against a background of real question marks about the wisdom of this expenditure. What could be wrong with that?
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It occurs to me that getting a bill from the member for Wentworth is something not many people would relish, and I can understand why in a number of counts. Nevertheless, I'm glad to be able to join others today speaking to this very craftily titled Private Members Bill, the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill. Now that sounds like something that would be hard to argue against, doesn't it? How could anyone disagree with financial transparency? Well, I'm afraid I do in this case, Madam Deputy Speaker, because what the member for Wentworth is actually trying to do is to build a straw man out of the NBN. He wants to define the success of the NBN in his own terms that would be quite different to people who live in regional areas like mine, people who are the big winners under the National Broadband Network. In his bill, the member for Wentworth says, give us a business case with a 10-year forecast and give it to us by Friday. Then he wants the Productivity Commission to do a cost-benefit analysis and publish it by the end of May next year. Now, it's all deceptively simple. Well, actually, it's just simply deceptive. This is a cynical spoiling tactic designed to delay the rollout. Before you know it, the great hope of regional Australia, the great equaliser of opportunity and access, will have gone up in smoke. Gone with it, the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of regional Australians. James Riley, writing for the IT Wire website, has belled the cat. Last month, after the member for Wentworth introduced his legislation, this is what James wrote. He, that is the member for Wentworth, is disingenuous, disarmingly disingenuous, when he says he won't stand in the way of the NBN if it's given the big tick by the Productivity Commission through the cost-benefit analysis. He will stand in the way because he knows this is a rigged game and because he opposes the NBN rollout at the most fundamental philosophical level. Hardwired into the Turnbull DNA is the rock-solid, unshakable belief that government has no business getting directly involved in a broadband rollout, that the delivery of such infrastructure is best left to the market, to the private sector. So says James Riley of the IT Wire. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am certain that this goes to the heart of the member for Wentworth's problem with the NBN. He's ideologically opposed to government funding NBN Co, and that is despite an abject failure of the Coalition's 18 broadband policies, which has seen prolonged lack of access for regional customers in seats such as mine and Robertson. Still, the member for Wentworth stubbornly clings to his belief that we're better off leaving things to the big end of town. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm certainly not ready to consign Australia to the digital dark ages by abandoning our future to the market. I'm not surprised to hear free market fanaticism from the member for Wentworth or the member for Bradfield, who I believe was a high flyer in the telco world before coming to this place. But frankly, I expect better from those on the other side who come from regional New South Wales. It shocks me to sit here and listen to the member for Gilmore and the member for Cowper parrot their colleagues' petty quibbles. Why don't they get it? The NBN is the great equaliser. It's the rising tide that floats all the boats, the technological advance that will break down the tyranny of distance for people living in regional Australia. The NBN will finally allow regional Australia to fulfil its promise to provide services on par to our metropolitan areas with the kind of lifestyle only our regions can offer. Last week, I caught up with the NBN's biggest supporters on the Central Coast, the chair of Central Coast Youth Connections, Dave Abrahams. Dave and the publisher of the Central Coast Business Review, Edgar Adams, who my fellow member from the Central Coast, the member for Dobell, has mentioned, are coming together to make a comprehensive business case for the introduction of NBN to our region. I am really looking forward to their first business case event later this month. We're ready to push ahead surely and relentlessly. So what should happen with this bill? Well, I think it's time for some plain speaking. This bill is just a tricky, self-serving bit of argument. It's put forward as a delaying tactic by an opposition that is bereft of vision, and it's still smarting from the NBN's role in the formation of this Labor government. We know that the Leader of the Opposition gave the member for Wentworth the job to demolish the NBN. This bill has nothing to do with public interest or financial transparency. It has everything to do with trying to bring down a most significant piece of nation-building infrastructure in our country. We have in this parliament an opposition that has no plan, no policy other than to nitpick and find fault with Labor's nation-building achievements. Perhaps without pausing for a moment to reflect on its lost office in decade in which it stunted our productivity growth through a miserly approach to infrastructure. I oppose the bill and encourage others to do the same.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This legislation that is proposed by the member for Wentworth is eminently sensible, and the sense of it is echoed in the voice of the OECD, which in turn is the voice of Treasury, which says very simply that there should be an analysis of the financial returns which are required under this bill proposed by the member for Wentworth. The OECD says some very important things that are relevant to support of this bill. It says basically the government should not trigger a weakening of competition in the wholesale broadband services to protect the viability of the government project. It says an alternative to this picking the winner strategy would be to let the market guide choices between various internet service options on the basis of price that reflect costs, factoring in the externalities that ought first to be evaluated. To that end, it would be desirable to maintain competition between technologies and within each technology between internet service providers. The question is not one of availability of high-speed broadband, it's a question of affordability. And an analysis of published figures shows very simply that those people earning less than $40,000 a year, only 43% of them utilise the internet, but those earning over $120,000 a year have a 94% utilisation. You can dangle the diamond standard before the people if you wish, but the poor will only be able to look because it won't be able to afford this very expensive mechanism. By having this bill passed and what is set out in the bill put into action, we will see truly that the government ought not to be creating a new monopoly, picking winners, but allow the market to in fact operate, and that the Productivity Commission has the wherewithal to be able to give guidance on this. It is not a delaying tactic. It is an eminently sensible way to proceed, and I thoroughly support the bill. If you look at the terms that are placed in the legislation as outlined by the member for Wentworth, you can see that the sorts of things it wants the productivity to look at are things that one would think that any sensible government would wish to look at. It would include an analysis of the availability of broadband services across Australia, identifying those suburbs and regions where current service is of a lesser standard and a higher price than the best services available in the city. It would also look, obviously, at the take-up rate, consideration of the economy-wide benefits likely to flow, consider the different options by which broadband services of particular speed could be made available. All eminently sensible.
Being 12 noon, in accordance with Standing Order 34, the debate is interrupted. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for a later hour.